A re-elected Liberal government will give more help to those living in the Greater Vancouver area by increasing the value of a qualifying home under the incentive program from approximately $500,000 to nearly $800,000. Now, these days, the Conservatives talk a big game about making life more affordable for Canadians. Let's not forget that they voted against the first-time homebuyer incentive when they had the chance. Under a Liberal government, we will continue to invest in families while finding new, innovative solutions to the challenges facing the middle class and people working hard to join it. Because at the end of the day, politics is about people. It's about you. And you deserve a government that fights for you and with you. Today, advance polls open. And as Canadians cast their ballots, they have an important choice to make. Will we go back to the failed policies of the past, or will we continue to move forward? That's the choice. It's that clear, and it's that important. I'm for moving forward. For students, for recent grads, for new parents, for everyone. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Mr. Trudeau, John Iveson, National Post. Central banks around the world are cutting rates. There are fears of a global recession. You've been criticised for having deficits that are quite large. Do you think that unbalance might be a good thing if there is a slowdown because it might act as stimulus?
We made a very different choice than Conservatives in this election as we did in the last election. We know that investing in Canadians, investing in young people, investing in their education, as we're announcing here today, investing in young families and parents, investing in our seniors, supporting families with investments in infrastructure right across the country is actually the way to grow the economy, is the way to build resilience when the world is facing challenging times, by making sure we're giving people every opportunity to reach their full potentials. Conservatives propose cuts. Indeed, we just found out why. Andrew Scheer waited until the Friday night of a long weekend before finally releasing his platform. It's because it includes $53 billion in cuts. Cuts that will be even deeper than those Ontarians are going through with the Ford government. So our decision to invest in people has actually delivered for Canadians. Over 1 million new jobs created, most of them full-time, and we've lifted 900,000 people out of poverty. And that's the choice facing Canadians right now. Do we continue to invest in people and grow the economy? Or do we go back to cuts and austerity the way Stephen Harper used to do, the way Doug Ford and Jason Kenney are doing right now? Okay. Nous avons fait un choix très différent.
We made a very different choice. The Conservatives, we decided to invest in families and young people and students and seniors and workers. And it worked. We saw 1 million new jobs created across the country, most full-time, and we saw 900,000 Canadians lifted out of poverty. The contrast is clear with the Conservatives who want to cut, and we understand why the Conservatives did not want to share their fiscal framework before a Friday evening. Before a long weekend, because they are offering $53 billion in cuts to the services that Canadians rely on, and a return to Harper year's austerity. So the choice in this election is very, very important. Do we continue to invest in people, to create economic growth by investing, or do we go back to cuts and austerity?
Sorry,
Trudeau,
question right here.
Mr. Trudeau, if we do go into recession, would you be prepared to go further into deficit?
We've made responsible decisions around investing because we understand how important fiscal responsibility is. We are keeping the size of our debt decreasing as a ratio of the size of our GDP, and at the same time, we have among the best balance sheets in the G7. There are only 2 countries that have AAA ratings by the top credit agencies, Canada and Germany in the G7. We know we have a responsible plan that has demonstrated growth that works for everyone, but we recognize there is more to do. And that choice of going ahead with $53 billion in cuts from the Conservatives, or investments in families, in students, in seniors, is the choice facing Canadians in a week.
Je vais vous entendre, Monsieur Trudeau, sur les
Mr. Trudeau, I'd like you to comment on what the Conservatives are proposing, balancing the budget in 5 years, delaying certain expenditures. They want to get revenues by focusing on tax evasion. Are there any valid measures in there to ensure that there's some certainty if there's a downturn in the economy? Well, for weeks and weeks we've been in an election campaign, and weeks ago we shared our platform. The Conservatives waited until the last minute to share their platform at the last minute and in secret, because they didn't want Canadians to know they're proposing $53 billion in cuts that will affect Canadians. We will be looking carefully where they're planning to cut, and I think Canadians will also be looking closely at the cuts and austerity being offered by the Conservatives. So it's important for Canadians to make the right choice. Do we continue to reinvest and create economic growth by lifting people out of poverty and creating jobs? Or do we go back to cuts in services and austerity, like under the Harper years?
I think we've seen very clearly that Conservatives are proposing $53 billion worth of cuts, deeper cuts than even Doug Ford is putting forward. And that's why they waited until Friday night of a long weekend at the end of the election before sharing with Canadians their plan to cut services. The choice couldn't be clearer in this election. Do we continue to move forward on a plan that invests and grows the economy by helping people, by creating jobs and lifting people out of poverty? Or do we go back to the kinds of cuts and austerity that Stephen Harper inflicted on Canadians for 10 years?
Yesterday, you said that you would never tax pipelines in Quebec. You would never force Quebec to accept a pipeline. Does that mean that Quebec will have a veto? Well, we see that there is no social acceptability for a pipeline in Quebec, and it's Andrew Scheer's plan to impose a pipeline on Quebec, not ours.
Public acceptability, no social acceptability for a pipeline in Quebec, and it is Andrew Scheer's plan to impose a pipeline in Quebec, not the Liberal plan.
Mr. Trudeau, you said last night during the French debate that you were okay with Quebec having the right to impose a Quebec values test in the selection process for immigrants. How is that different from what former Conservative leadership candidate Kelly Leitch was proposing, the Canadian test on values?
The Quebec government has a certificate of selection process that is entirely a Quebec-led process. It is their rules on who they grant that certificate to. It's different from permanent residency. It's different from citizenship. It is a process that is entirely Quebec jurisdiction within the Canada-Quebec immigration accords. They have the right to move forward on whatever criteria they want for that certificate of selection. It is within their responsibility. Okay. Le Québec a, dû aux accords sur l'immigration
as a result of immigration agreements between Canada and Quebec, Quebec has full control over how it intends to issue those certificates of selection. So they have the right to determine which criteria will apply and who will deserve such a credit, a certificate.
Asking future immigrants about their values, what would you consider an inappropriate question on such a test, and would you be willing to intervene if there was such a question on the test?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals on this one. That's a Quebec responsibility to deliver their certificate of selections.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Tom Perry with CBC. I'd like to ask you about the situation in Syria. What exactly is the government going to do to track or prevent the escape and return to Canada of Islamic State terrorists being held by Kurdish forces in Syria?
It is a crime in Canada to travel abroad for the purpose of supporting or engaging in terrorist activity. And we will ensure that the law is fully applied.
I know your government said that it won't help fighters return to Canada, but are there active steps that you would take to prevent them from returning to Canada?
We will continue to focus our efforts on stability and reconstruction in the region, even as we continue to hold strong against Daesh. Canada is leading a training mission for NATO in Baghdad, and we're going to continue to monitor the situation in the region very closely.
Would you try to prevent them, though, from returning to Canada?
Sir, you just a moment ago said that there's no social acceptability for a pipeline in Quebec, and for that reason, you will not impose a pipeline on the province. But here we've seen a lot of opposition to Trans Mountain. Why is it different? Why is the government willing to impose a pipeline on BC but not Quebec?
We worked with the government at the time to move forward with the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion.
We moved forward with the provincial government to go ahead with the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion project.
The current government thinks it's because of the previous negotiations.
I have had many excellent conversations with Premier Horgan on the kinds of investments that we can make together to fight climate change, to grow the economy, to help British Columbians, and I look forward to continuing to work with Premier Horgan as a strong ally as we create opportunities for people and fight climate change.
Abigail Beeman, Global News. Since the Conservative platform was released, your party has been critical specifically on infrastructure cuts, and I'm wondering if you can square that with the criticisms your government has faced about spending a lot on infrastructure but not actually making those projects happen.
I think it is quite evident to Canadians right across the country, but particularly in areas where there are Conservative provincial premiers, that those Conservatives have been dragging their heels on investments in infrastructure. Here in British Columbia, where we have a great relationship with Premier Horgan, we've been able to move forward hand in glove on infrastructure investments, making a huge difference across the Lower Mainland, right across the province. But in a number of provinces with Conservative premiers, they don't believe in investing in infrastructure. They don't believe in investing for the future. So we will continue to work, as necessary, directly with municipalities as a way of delivering the much-needed infrastructure Canadians need right across the country, even when Conservative politicians, as they always do, offer cuts instead of investments.
Tonight you're making your second stop in Burnaby South. You made your major climate announcement there. I'm wondering what message you're sending to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh.
I am happy to be out across the country, happy to be back in the Lower Mainland, happy to be talking with Canadians right across the country about the important choice they have to make. Do we go back to the Harper approach with $53 billion of cuts announced in secret on a Friday night before a long weekend at the end of the campaign? Or do we keep moving forward on a plan to fight climate change, to strengthen gun control, to invest in families and make life more affordable for the middle class and those working hard to join it? Andrew Scheer's platform proposes cuts in taxes for the wealthiest. We're going to keep investing in the middle class and people working hard to join it.
Michelle Zilio with the Globe and Mail. Why have you only been to Alberta once during this election campaign?
I am happy to be out across the country. I was pleased to get to every single province in the first 10 days of the campaign, and over the last 10 days of the campaign, I will continue to make it out to as many communities as possible to highlight the contrast between a vision of Conservative premiers like Jason Kenney and Doug Ford and what Andrew Scheer proposes of $53 billion worth of cuts for people, and our plan to keep investing because it's what's working. It's what's working to lift people out of poverty, including 300,000 kids. It's what's working to see over 1 million new jobs created by Canadians, most of them full-time. And it's working to put in place the first real climate change plan in action that this country has ever seen.
Are you concerned that this single visit to the province of Alberta will play into the criticisms that you are ignoring the province?
I am continuing to engage right across the country, and Albertans know that we are serious about moving forward responsibly in fighting climate change and growing the economy. And there is a tremendous negativity out there from conservative premiers like Jason Kenney, and we're going to stay positive and offer not cuts and austerity, but investments that both fight climate change and build a stronger future for Canadians. That's the choice Canadians are facing.
Your candidate in Vancouver Granville, not that far from here, is in a very tight race against Jody Wilson-Raybould. That's one of the communities you haven't been to yet. Are you avoiding that riding so you don't remind people of the SNC-Lavalin affair?
We have a very big country with 338 ridings right across the country. I'm always pleased to get out to as many of them as possible and talk with Canadians directly about the choice they're facing in this election. Do we go back to the cuts of the Harper years, $53 billion worth of cuts announced on a Friday night of a long weekend at the end of the campaign in secret? Or do we move forward on continuing to invest in Canadians? I know Canadians want to keep moving forward, and that's the choice they're facing 10 days from now.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Most of the polls are not giving a clear mandate to any of the party. So in case if your government comes in minority this time, then with which party will you take the initiative to tie up?
I know that Canadians are going to be gathering with their families this weekend at Thanksgiving and reflecting on the future of our country, reflecting on the important choice that they're facing. Are we going to continue to fight climate change? Are we going to continue to invest in families, in students, in seniors, in infrastructure that's going to grow the economy and help lift people out of poverty? Are we going to strengthen gun control? Or are we going to make a choice to go with the Conservatives and weaken gun control? I know families across the country will be having that conversation this weekend, and it's an important one. Do we choose forward, or do we go back to the Harper years?
Well, what is going to be your preference in going with any other party?
My preference is to have a strong, clear mandate that will allow us to stand up to those conservative premiers from the Rockies to the Bay of Fundy who don't think we should be acting on climate change, who think cuts to services that Canadians rely on is the way to grow the economy, and continue to give tax breaks to the wealthiest instead of support to people who need them. The choice Canadians are facing is a really big one. And I know they're going to be talking with friends and families this weekend over turkey and family dinners and reflecting on whether we continue to move forward as a country or whether we go back to the failed approach of the Harper years.
Last question, down with Justin. I'm Daphne Bramman from the Vancouver Sun. You have just talked about raising the amount, the support for first-time home buyers so that they can qualify with $800,000. Can you talk about how you came up with that and what the rationale is when that program has been criticized for, in fact, putting young people at risk because they're going to be in over their heads, particularly if the mortgage rates and interest rates go up? And given my colleague John Iveson's concerns about the economy and all of our concerns about the economy in the future, does this not put them more at risk at being underwater in mortgages as things go forward?
We know that buying their first home is one of the most important decisions that young people will make. And we also know that right across the country, it is more and more difficult for young people to be able to buy their first home. That is why we created the first-time home buyers incentive that gives up to 10% of the value of your home in a tax-free upfront payment that will allow you to lower your monthly mortgage payments and afford to buy your home sooner. We brought in this in the 2019 budget, and it is already looked at extremely favorably as a concrete measure that will help families right across the country. But we heard very clearly that in certain areas, like the GTA, like the Greater Vancouver area, like Victoria, housing prices are so high that we needed to raise the amount of qualifying, the price of qualifying homes. That's why your homes up to $800,000 will be available under this program. This is a program that will tangibly help young people be able to afford their first home, which, as we know, will serve them to build equity throughout their lives and have more confidence in their future and in their career paths.
Are you not concerned at all, though, that you're putting them at risk because they're getting in over their heads should those mortgage rates go up?
We made significant moves in making sure that affordability for housing is something that is important. We've moved forward in ways that have ensured that people can afford their homes, but we're also going to give them more money up front so that they can afford the home that is right for them. That's what Canadians expect, and that's, again, another example of the contrast people are facing in this election, the choice. Do we go with a government that is going to continue to invest in them and move forward, or do we go back to the Harper years? That's the question Canadians are asking themselves. Merci tout le monde.